Extremely excited to welcome our first speaker for the year, who's all the way from the US. Kumi, as she's called, is actually associate professor of communication at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and extremely accomplished in her area. And her research is in the intersection of identity politics, post-colonial studies, cultural studies, and popular culture. As she is also the author of a book called Brown Threat: Identification in the Security State. Wow. And co-editor of Feminist Erasures, is it? Yes. Challenge in Backlash Culture, and of Migration, Identity and Belonging, defining borders and boundaries of the homeland. So Kumi has actually been teaching now for many years in the US, and focusing on communication. And today she's going to be talking to us about how media influences our thinking and shapes our reality. So we have again Kumi, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. I know it's very early over there, and it's a Sunday morning, the day that you generally sleep in, I guess. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute privilege to have you. Over to you, Kumi.
Thank you, Sanjeev, and thank you everybody for being here. Actually, the privilege is mine. This is really exciting, and I'm glad that technology has allowed us to do this, even as I am going to talk about some of the problems and challenges of it. I have to say one of the benefits is that we can meet like this, and that it's a really amazing opportunity for me, especially to be able to connect with all of you, which is something that I wish I had more chances to do, and now I do. What I do want to do is I have, so the way I'm going to set this up is that I'm going to talk for about, I think 15 to 20 minutes maybe. Studies have shown that when you are lecturing, the attention span of a student or anybody listening is on average about 3 minutes. So I'm going to try and push that to 15 if possible. And then I thought we could open up and have a general discussion, and I could talk about anything you wanted to talk about connected to the topic or just life in general. And like I was saying, I'm very excited to be here and to be able to do this. And I keep thinking how, especially during the pandemic, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about how amazing technology is, and that not just technology, but even our mediated environments, like the things we watch, the things we use to entertain ourselves, have especially been a wonderful thing. And this kind of leads me to the first point I want to make. And I do this with every class I teach, every lecture I give, even or when I talk to my friends. And the first thing I say is media is not a bad thing. It's not something that, when I think about media, I don't think about it as something that I need to give up, because we can't. I mean, we don't live in caves unless you want to live in a cave and like not interact with anybody. All of our lives are around media. We are completely immersed in it. Um, and even whether it's through casual interactions or whether we watch something directly, um, we are always in the middle of a mediated environment. So given that broader context, that media is part of our reality, that we cannot move away from it, it's part of our everyday experiences, and that it shapes the way we think about things, whether something is fun or cool or interesting. I want to start by talking about really briefly two kind of broader theoretical approaches, and then I want to go to the more practical stuff. So one way to think about the impact of media is to think about the critical cultural approach, which is actually the area that my research and teaching is in. And people working in this area, like me, think about how issues of accessibility, how power, and when we talk about power, we don't mean like direct power of, where you can see one person enacting power on another person, but what kind of access to resources, how people create social systems out of media, how those issues of access are embedded in relationships of power. So we can think about how kind of overt and covert messages about things that are in the media are given to us with particular kind of expectations in mind. So when we see an image, to recognize that that image comes with a particular message, that it's never in a vacuum. We don't share anything in a vacuum. There's a very, like, quite simply, right? Like even this PowerPoint, the way I have set up this image and the choices I have made about color, about the graphic on the screen are very deliberate choices, right? They expect to express something, say something about myself, say something about the work, the idea of thinking. So the point for critical culture scholars is to really think about what goes into these seemingly casual decisions about representations. The second area is to think about effects. What is the effect then of these representations on larger populations? How do we make sense of our reality once we see these images? What kind of emotional impact do these images have on us? So those are the two broader approaches that I'm going to kind of frame my short points with. And now I'm on multiple computers, so I'm trying to, this is what happens when you're in too much of a mediated environment. We are trying to use too much technology at the same time. So the first point I want to make is that we are not immune to media, even though most people think other people are more affected than we are. So this is an assumption that we all make, and communication scholars, and this is a term that has been taken up in communication scholarship from psychology, and we call it the third person effect. The third person effect is that we believe that other people are more influenced by media than we are. Even though we are just as influenced, we believe we are more immune to it than other people are. The second point is that media influences how we perceive people, especially people we don't know. So in my own work, I have called this a form of armchair anthropology. And what I mean by that is that we sit in our chairs, we watch something, and we're all anthropologists. Suddenly we know everything about the culture we are watching based on the media representation. So this can be something as simple as watching a whole lot of crime shows coming out of the United States and assuming that the crime statistics are very high in the US across the country, right? Like suddenly this is like a belief system. And I actually, like, I know this only because when I've been living here for 30 years, and it doesn't matter if I was like 20 or 40, my parents would always say, be careful, that place is so scary. And that the assumption that the United States is like this really a place where there's a lot of violence, which is not untrue, but it's not universally like that, right? Not every place is like that. And you can see that, so that's through watching popular culture, but then you can also watch things like the National Geographic Channel and see some rural community and assume that all parts of a particular country or a space are exactly like that. And it's interesting because the reverse of what happens with popular culture in the United States happens with me and Sri Lanka here, where people are often surprised when I say that, like, for me, Colombo looks like a little mini New York, right? There are high rises, there are all kinds of the same kinds of lifestyle. But because of the way that media always brings quote unquote third world countries into our mediated environments in the first world, there's an assumption that all these spaces are kind of like more rural than urban. So what happens with media is that it can set this kind of precedent for how we see people and understand and see spaces. But at the same time, especially through social media, media has also become places to call out these acts of kind of acts like bullying or problematic kind of any kind of social condition like racism, especially in the United States. The Black Lives Matter movement has a whole Twitter presence. They use it really widely for their activism. So at the same time, there is also this kind of wonderful, more interpersonal, more organized activist artistic space emerging from these media environments. So part of this is recognizing and balancing it, that especially in the midst of a pandemic where there's increased social isolation, that we have become more dependent both on the interpersonal aspects of media, like social media, to stay connected, but also more dependent on entertainment media because we constantly want to be entertained, right? We don't have the usual interpersonal connections or the in-person connections. So we are always trying to make connections by watching things, by interacting with people on text or WhatsApp. So essentially, this is a media saturated environment. And one of the things that I'm going to keep trying to do is that when you think about media or talk about media or even do what I'm doing right now, which is talk to you about media, it's really hard to think about how complex the web of media is, that it's not just one thing, it's not just us watching, but it also includes, like I said, the social media, the interpersonal relationships, the affect. So there are all of these conditions that come together to create what we call the media effects. So why the big question then is like, how does the media do this? How is it able to kind of set the agenda, which I'll speak to next? How does it set the agenda about the images that how does it make the decision? How are we getting the images that we get? So a really common term that's often used is that media are gatekeepers. So gatekeeper refers to groups of people who are in charge of the media, and I have listed like editors, owners, bloggers, producers, and advertisers who then either actively or kind of in more subtle ways regulate the kinds of images that we see. So we have to realize that media is a business, right? It's not it's something that is supposed to generate money. And the expectation is that in order to make money, you have to sell your program to advertisers. So advertisers can dictate in a lot of cases, especially in the US, what kind of content is in your show. So for example, on a very like kind of funded, like a very small example, if we take the US news cycle, and I'm sure that all of you have been, following the last 4 years of our crazy lives in the United States under thankfully former President Trump. And what happened was that if you went to a channel like Fox News, which is a conservative news source and is funded by conservative advertisers and sponsors, what you got was a completely different news cycle than if you went to a more like middle of the road or progressive news site like MSNBC or CNN. Because actually CNN and Fox are a great example of this because they're both mainstream. They also have global audiences that you could go on the same day to both sites at the same time and see completely different stories as the lead stories, and not only could you, and if the same story was on there, you would see completely different takes on both stories. And it would be largely dictated by what the audience was, because advertisers want the audience. So what the media does is, the media is the middle section that sells the audience to the advertisers in return for money. So advertisers then say, we want this show on at this time so we can get this audience. And the show then caters to attracting that audience. So essentially, the media acts as kind of a gatekeeper. It tells us what we can see. It kind of makes the decision about what and who can see what at what time. Let me see if I can get this. Oh. So this is the point I was trying to make. So by doing the gatekeeping, media sets the agenda for what we should pay attention to. So one of the things that is a line that is used often in media studies and journalism studies even, media does not tell us what to think, but they do tell us what to think about. So what issue is important, what people are cool, which people are cool, what is good, what is bad. It directs us into these priorities. We, of course, have the agency to participate or turn off the channel or not, interact with these things. But what it does is present us the options. And the options are the options that they present to us. These are not always generated by us, right? So what is important to these larger corporations in terms of money, audience, is then kind of seamlessly incorporated into the images that we see, and we choose from these images. So it basically sets the agenda for what is significant or what should be important to us. This image on the left that I have is one that I share a lot, and it's actually the ways that media corporations are owned in the, actually this is global, so this is affects even Sri Lanka. So overall in the US, all media in the world is owned by 7 large corporations, 7 in the United States and 6 are in the United States and Bertelsmann, 1 is in Europe. So all the kind of popular global media that is generated from these corporations. So that, as you can see from this, the only independent subscriber, the only independent corporation is Netflix. They are the only ones who generate their own content. All these other companies, including Hulu, are connected to Disney, which is connected to Fox, which is connected to Comcast. So there is this kind of cross-pollination of information, which then that agenda gets reinforced over and over and over again. So this point that media doesn't tell you what to think, it tells you what to think about, is something that I want to spend a little bit of time on. What the media does is, with the images that it presents, it tells us what our lives should look like. One of the reasons that we watch things and we are consumed or involved in things is because we have an interest in them, and the interest is usually, and this may not be true for everybody, I'm sure there are isolated incidents, but I'm talking in generalizations, that media tells us what we should look like, what we should be like, what our aspirations should be like. And we also gauge the success. This has come over years and years of studies in the US, that media especially tells us what we should aspire to, like what kind of things we should have in our house, what our houses should look like, how hard we should work, All of these things come to us from our mediated environments, because that's how we make sense, increasingly make sense of our world, right? That we, when we want to find something, we go online and we look at like multiple images, or we go on Instagram, or we go on Facebook, and we ask, quote unquote, the hive mind, right? And this is something about that kind of collectively tells us, okay, this is an indication of the good life, and this is what we should have. This has an enormous impact on our mental and physical health, because images are not real life. And those images are not attainable. They are put together by large production teams, either videotaped or photographed in a second, or carefully choreographed. And they are not real life. And there is this real sense of letdown when our own lives don't mirror that of the images that we see. Because we forget that advertising, especially all of these images, but if we especially look at advertising, easy to look at because it's a much clearer, you can see the connection far more clearly. Advertising is based on creating a lack, right? The main goal of advertising is to tell you that something is missing in your life and that you need it. And that you miss this thing, you miss this feeling. And therefore, if you buy this product, that product will fill this lack. But the thing is, that product does not, that feeling is filled momentarily, not by the product, but by the satisfaction of buying it. So once you buy it, you're back to feeling kind of crappy about yourself. And you're like, okay, now I need to find the other thing that'll make me just as good as I felt when I was buying this other thing. So it creates this kind of ongoing cycle of kind of highs and lows that mediated kind of, especially advertising, mediated context advertising depend on. Now studies are showing that this kind of high and low that we had with conventional advertising, we are getting through social media likes. So people feel really bad when they post something and they don't get enough likes. Very similar to how advertising made us feel, like kind of conventional advertising made us feel. And that especially younger generations have become increasingly reliant on the amount of likes that they get, whether it's on Insta or whether it's on, I mean, there's a huge generational divide between Facebook and Insta. But if you're on TikTok or if you're on Insta or Snapchat, you really need, like, you are waiting for people to like you. And that this requires a social interaction that creates a dependency in these social relationships. Unfortunately, because of this dependency, social media has also become a site of intense bullying. So UNICEF, this was a report that came out in 2019, and this was a global study that children between 13 and 24, at least I think the numbers are something like 40% of children, it might even be more than that, report intense bullying on social media. And the bullying comes in the form of kind of comments on how they look, how their homes look, what their videos look like, what their bodies look like, what their identities are, who they are, their sexual preferences, their life, like other kinds of life related things that end up with high percentage of children either harming themselves or actually even taking their own lives. So given this broader context, I want to think about, and these are kind of my last few comments is how can we think about media as how can we, media is here, right? Like I started off the presentation by saying we're not going away. Like this is part of who we are. This is our life. Like I'm somebody who loves watching TV. I love being on social media. I'm not about to give any of these things up, and I never ask anybody to give these things up. But what I do think we need is a kind of, and this has been going on for a long time, especially in media studies, we call it a visual literacy, to understand, just like we understand reading and we have reading comprehension of words, what does it mean to be literate in visuals? What does it mean to be literate in mediated environments? So that is also an education that is needed. And there are two things that we can do, there are many things we can do, but the most fundamental two things I can think of is improving our critical thinking skills. So I always start by saying when I say critical thinking skills, it does not mean to criticize things. It means to question the most obvious meaning of something. So when we look at an image and we think, oh my God, that looks amazing, I wish I looked like that. The first thing to think about is, but why? Why do I want to look like that? Does this person look like that in real life? How much work has gone to this? So, and why is this even here? What am I supposed to feel by looking at this? What is the expectation? And to question those things. So always question what is most obvious without just saying, that is the person, I want to look like this. I mean, think about the amount of times we have these amazing images of, like, we see a haircut, for example, in a magazine, and we take it to the hairdresser and say, I want this. And the hairdresser gives you that haircut, and then you're like, wait, but I don't look like this person. Because you don't. That's like a fashion shoot. And while you're looking at the hair, your mind is also filling in the blanks of that person's face and everything when you look back at yourself. So critical thinking skills means to recognize those gaps, to recognize when you're filling things in that you don't know, and then tell yourself, I'm just filling these things in. Like, this is ridiculous. I don't look like this. My house doesn't look like this. And it's okay. So we have to recognize that some things that are presented do benefit us. They help us recognize the possibility of organizing, of presentation. They teach us social skills. They teach us how to live in a world in particular ways. And there are good images. And then be able to recognize the difference between what is good and what is harmful. And to kind of think about questioning those things. There are bell hooks, and she does write her name in lowercase. Bell hooks is a cultural theorist, and her work has been always on media and television and film. And she has come up with this notion of the oppositional gaze to be thoughtful and critical media consumers. And one of the things about the oppositional gaze is that you have to be conscious of, like, there are a few things you can do. Like, you can be asking yourself, like I said, if this isn't, like, let's say you're getting an ad, whether it's on Insta or something like that, you can ask yourselves, why am I the target market? What is this telling me? What am I supposed to be based on this ad? Or if you see you're watching something or a particular show, you can say, well, this is great and it's fun and it's entertaining. And the moment you start saying, oh, kind of wish my life was like that, you can ask yourself, well, is that the expectation? Of course my life can't be like this. This is in another place at another time with actors, kind of reminding yourself. And then kind of reminding yourself that, so you can also reposition yourself based on understanding the differences between like what is actually in your own world and what is being shown on the media. You can talk about whether these images are aspirational, and if they're aspirational, do you aspire to these things? Are these aspirations for you, or are they set for you by the media? So these are kind of the basic two kind of critical thinking skills and oppositional the oppositional gaze are the two areas that we kind of theoretically that I most focus on when I'm teaching. And here are like and I want to end by like this main slide with the kind of the breakdown of these two things. So developing an oppositional gaze, think about the perspective from which you are looking. And what I mean by that is, think about like while you're watching something or you're even kind of on social media, think about like, what am I looking for? Why am I here? Sometimes, to be honest, when I'm on social media, I realize I'm on social media because I'm bored, not because I'm really interested in knowing what my friends are doing, right? Like, I'm not that invested in somebody else's life at this particular moment, but I'm bored. The other thing is I've also realized, like, sometimes I'm hungry or thirsty, and instead of like addressing those things, I'm like, oh, something is not right, so I'll just go on Facebook or like scroll through Insta. And then I realize, oh wait, that's not what I should be doing. I should be like going and getting a glass of water or getting something to eat. And I think we also have to recognize the degree to which we participate in that culture. We reinforce this. We bring these images into our own communities, into our lives, into our social systems. And we participate in these actively. Again, these are not necessarily bad things. We can't live outside of those things. I am wearing something that I bought from ASOS, which is one of my favorite clothing companies. I go to their website all the time. I like their brand. I like how the images look. So I'm very much part of this system. But I also try to spend a lot of time thinking about why that is. And to be, and I also, and I'm not saying it's easy or that it's something that we can do consistently, but I try to do it as much as I can. Be conscious of commodification. And what I mean by this is to really pay attention to what is being prioritized around particular ideas. So one thing that really has surprised me over the years, especially in context of like going as somebody who lives both in the United States but comes back home every year, is to look at the impact that kind of US commodity culture has had in Sri Lanka. And I know I sound like some old person who's like, oh my God, in the good old days, we played in the woods and, you know, but that's not exactly what I'm saying. I think it's the ways that the hyper commodification, in some ways, even more than it is in the US. So we've taken ideas from the United States, we brought it to some other place, and we've intensified it. And those intensifications happen, going back to the very first thing I said, because of how kind of larger cultural structures work. So we're really invested in kind of trying to recreate spaces that are outside of our own geographic spaces, and kind of, instead of thinking about what works for us in this moment, we are more invested in importing something from somewhere else and making it fit within our space, instead of asking ourselves, is this something that really fits? Or is there a better version of this that we can do that is relevant to us and our broader communities and the communities that we're invested in? And this is one of my favorite things. I end every one of my classes, regardless of, at the end of the semester, I always tell them my last thing is go out and change the world, which of course is a tall order. But I think that we can also organize, we can move away from just criticizing media to actually organizing and being politically active and saying, no, these are not images we want to see, or we would like to see more images of this. So, or even something as simple as like ask ourselves, you know, if you're watching TV, even ads that are generated in the US or in Sri Lanka, or a lot of the ads that we get from India, we can start asking ourselves questions like, why are all the cleaning products, why do they always feature women? What is the expectation around housework and women that is so embedded in that? And why do we always buy into that? Why are all of the women, most of the women in these ads, lighter skinned women or even white passing women? What is it about our culture that does that, or elevates those kinds of hierarchies? So that's developing both an oppositional and a critical gaze, asking those kinds of questions. On a really practical level, this is something, my husband is also a professor of media studies, and we both use these to, in our classes, both graduate and undergraduate, and it has worked really well. We tell our students to do media cleanses. This is really hard, and for those of you who are parents, this is like terrible and really stressful. But the students kind of tend to love it. And we also have an 11-year-old, and we do it with her too, and she really does call it a media cleanse. We ask her not to watch TV or have any interaction with social media for, with our students, we ask them to do it for a week and see how long they can go. But with our 11-year-old, we do it for like a weekend. We'll say Friday to Sunday evening. You can't have any media. And another thing is you can time your media consumption, right? I think one of the things that we tend to do is that we have it around us all the time. And I'm really conscious of this too, because I work on, especially now because of Zoom, I'm on my computer all the time. So I am always either scrolling through like Netflix or Hulu, or I'm looking at Facebook, or I'm on my phone. I have it all, like literally, like right now, I have it all spread out. And it makes me feel really comfortable. Like I'm always, like I'm not gonna miss out anything. The FOMO is real, right? The fear of missing out. So we're always checking. But if we time ourselves, it really works to give yourself breathing room to know how your body feels when you're not in that space. And it does sharpen your critical thinking skills. We try really hard to turn off our phones and technology during meal times. We're not always successful, but that's one thing to think about, that we can kind of say, okay, here are windows where we're not having our phones on or the television running or anything like that. And this is why I guess, you know, lightning reading is good. Find alternate means of entertainment, like read. We always, in our household, and I break this rule all the time. So both my husband and daughter follow this. By like 8 o'clock at night, we turn off all technology. I don't, because I would lose my mind. But but I, at least between 8 and 10, I try to take a break. But oftentimes, another thing that we do is many of us just fall asleep to the TV, and studies show that, or watching something, studies show that that's incredibly bad, like for your mind and your health, because you're falling asleep to the TV screen, and the lights from it keep your brain awake far longer than it normally wants to at night. And I'm in the midst of trying to break this habit, so I can update you on how that goes. It's not always successful. So we like the idea of the lifestyle, and then we buy into it. And that is basically what most of media does. It sells us a lifestyle that's very hard to attain, but we keep consuming it because it makes us feel good, and or makes us momentarily feel good, or makes us hopeful. And then we have a crash because we can't acquire it. And then we think, okay, we'll move on to the next thing. So I want to end there with the kind of more formal comments on me talking constantly, which is not fun for anybody. And instead, open it up for questions or discussions or anything like that.
Thanks a lot, Kumi. It's been an absolutely fantastic session. I know it's very early over there. Thanks for spending your time with us and getting up early as well.
Anytime.
And thanks everyone for being here. It's a good start to the year. Please do give us your ideas and suggestions for super speakers like Kumi, authors as well, whom we can get for the next sessions going forward as well. Thanks once again, Kumi. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, stay blessed, and see you guys soon. Thanks a lot, Kumi, once again. Take care.